Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's sponsor is Agenda. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, as always, is our editor-in-chief at MacStories, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's been a busy week, and not so much for me at MacStories. I was actually out on the road driving to California and back. And
You came back to reality now.
I did. And that's a story for another day. But as a result, I didn't do a whole lot of writing on the site this week, but we're going to go through the posts. You guys carried on without me. I guess I'm replaceable by a combination of
No,
you.
you're not replaceable. Come on. we missed you, John. We missed
Oh,
you.
well, that's good to know, Federico. Thank you so much. But you know, just as I arrived back in the Chicago area from my whirlwind tour of the West Coast of America, you and Sylvia published the MacStories Perspective Icons, which is a mind-blowing 20,000 icon set of icons designed specifically for OmniFocus Pro. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's all about?
Yeah. So this is a new product released under the MacStories Pixel design brand. Here's a quick summary for you. It's an icon set designed for OmniFocus Pro. Specifically, OmniFocus Pro, because it's the only version of OmniFocus that allows you to change the icons for your perspectives. Perspectives is a feature of OmniFocus that lets you create custom views inside the app. It's a feature that OmniFocus Power users really rely on a lot, really use a lot. And so this icon set contains 20,000 different icons. That number comes from this calculation. So you have 400 unique glyphs, so 400 unique symbols to choose from for all kinds of categories of icons. You have entertainment glyphs, you have productivity, note-taking, writing, home automation, there's all kinds of stuff. 2 different styles. So each glyph is available in 2 icon styles. You can use the glyph alone, so there's a glyph-only version, but there's also a square version. So the square version will be an icon shape. And if you know OmniFocus, you know this is the default style that the Omni Group uses for default perspectives or default views like projects or tags, for example.
Right.
So they blend right in. The square style perspective icons, they blend right into the OmniFocus sidebar. So 400 symbols, 2 styles, and here's where the multiplication gets a little out of hand. 25 different colors each. So all the default perspective colors of OmniFocus are supported in this set. So if you install one of our custom icons, but then you also need to pick a color, right, in OmniFocus for the text label of the perspective. Well, there's an exact one-to-one match between the colors of the icons and the colors of OmniFocus. So basically, the idea would be that all these custom icons, they look like native additions to the OmniFocus sidebar. It's not like one of those icon sets that you download from the web. And yes, you can sort of use in OmniFocus, but you can tell that it's not like a design for OmniFocus. This is the exact opposite. Like this icon set was designed specifically for OmniFocus. So like down to the individual colors and the style of the icons that you can install, and the resolution, it's been optimized for Mac, iPad, and iPhone. So when you combine it all together, 402 versions, 25 different colors, that's 20,000 different icons you can choose from.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I also want to point out how we had this product ready to go for a while now, but we were waiting for OmniFocus version 3.8. This is important. If you're using OmniFocus, make sure that you update to the latest version, especially on the iPhone and iPad, because just like shortcuts, you can now install custom icons, not by choosing them from photos, which, as we all know, forces all PNG files to become JPEGs. You can now pick custom icon files from the Files app. So OmniFocus 3.8 as a native files picker. So it couldn't be easier. You just buy the icons, you download them somewhere into Files, you extract the zip archive, you wait a couple of minutes because Files, unfortunately, is kind of slow on iOS and iPadOS. But then from OmniFocus, you can pick an icon directly from there. You don't need to like go in, find the icon, save the icon into Photos. You can just pick it from a folder. And so because of this, you can search inside that folder. So you can search by name, you can search inside the subfolder, you can search across all different versions of the same icon. So like if you type something like document, you will see 25 different versions of the same document icon in 25 different colors. So I've been using this myself, and I really, really love the look of the OmniFocus sidebar. Now that I use the perspective icons, you can see the screenshots on MacStories. So these are available at $17.99 at launch. They're going to be $24.99 after the intro sale is over. And if you're a Club MacStories member, you can get an additional 15% off on top of the introductory pricing. So there's an exclusive promo code for you that you can apply on top of the initial launch price. So yeah, this is the big surprise that we were teasing for the past few weeks. We've been working on this for such a long time. I mean, 20,000 different icons. Silvia just completely wild what she was able to do. And it's another product that she made and I use myself, just like the shortcuts icons.
Right.
So I'm very happy that this is finally available.
Yeah, I think they complement the shortcuts icons really well. And I think that's what's really unique about this and neat for OmniFocus users is that, if you're an OmniFocus Pro user, you're spending a fair amount of money to use OmniFocus. And one of the power features you get from that is the ability to customize these icons. And now you have this incredible array of choice of really nice icons that you can use to make OmniFocus your very own, which is part of the whole point of OmniFocus Pro in the first place. So if you're an OmniFocus user and have been looking for ways to customize your perspectives, definitely check out the icons. On the website, we'll have the link in the show notes to the announcement and to the page where you can buy these, and you can see previews of everything to get an idea for what they're like. All right, Federico, for our second story, I wanted to mention the inside story of Mythic Quest's quarantine episode. So, you've seen probably some other shows doing this sort of thing. Right now, TV production is halted for the most part around the world. And as a result, there are a lot of actors and producers and directors with time on their hands. So they're trying to find ways to fill the gap. And Mythic Quest is a TV Plus show. And it's a show that I've watched the whole thing of. And I really like it. It's about a game developer shop. And it's a comedy. And when I started watching it, I guess it's been a few months now since I watched it. But it's one of those shows where the first couple of episodes I wasn't so sure. But it really grew on me over time. And by the end, I was just, plowing through episode after episode until I got to the end. And I was really excited to see that this has come out because it's a unique take on what's going on during quarantine for companies and people trying to get their work done and being stuck at home. And Ryan did a really nice post about it where he talked about how it was done. And it's, the behind the scenes story is in part that they did it with 40 iPhones, not surprising given that it's an Apple show, 40 iPhones and 20 sets of earbuds, which is pretty cool. And I guess they were so happy with the results that they have submitted it for Emmy consideration. And based on what Ryan said in the article, it does sound like a great episode. Since I was on the road, I haven't watched it yet myself, but it's on tap for one of the things I'm going to watch this weekend.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, it's on my to-watch list as well. I want to mention Spend Stack, which is an expense manager that we reviewed on MacStories last year when the first version came out. And there's a brand new update that Ryan covered a few days ago on the site. And this new version of Spend Stack added, I think it's one of the first apps that actually supports importing your statements, your Apple Card statements. So if you're an Apple Card user, you can now export your statements as a CSV file from the Wallet app on your iPhone. And now you can import this statement into Spend Stack, where you will have a separate account where you will see all these statements, and the app will be able to import the CSV. So it'll support the categories, the amount, the date, all those details will be, you can make it searchable, which is not something that you can do inside the Wallet app. So if you want to make your Apple Card statement history searchable, this is one way to go about it. You can just import it into Spend Stack. The new version of the app also supports multiple currencies, which is very nice because I can now create separate lists for like subscriptions, for examples, that I'm paying for. And I can have both US dollar subscriptions and euro subscriptions, which is something that I do because I have a US App Store account. So my App Store subscriptions I pay for in US dollars, but my other subscriptions that I pay for on the web, like Netflix or Feedbin, for example, I pay in euros. And now with SpendStack, I can have separate lists with separate currencies for both of those. Speaking of which, I can keep track of subscriptions inside of SpendStack now because it supports recurring costs. So it's not like in the original version that you can only add a one-time expense. Now you can have an expense be recurring. So it's very nicely done. There's a sidebar that pops in when you're editing an expense on iPad, and there's a field for incurring costs, and you can go in there and make a recurring expense. It's very nicely done. And speaking of which, SpendStack is an example of a modern app, and has been that kind of example of like a modern utility that uses a lot of system technologies that Apple gives developers for free. Now it's even more integrated with the system. So like there's multiple customizable icons, there's support for context menus everywhere, and there's deep pointer integration on iPad. So you can fully control the app using the trackpad or using an external pointing device, and you can right click to show context menus. And now you can also, you can switch the icons. There's some really nice options in there. So I've been actually taking a look at this one myself because I've never been fully happy with expense managers that I find on the App Store for one reason or another. Like they're not customizable enough, or maybe they don't have an iPad version. And this one so far I'm pretty happy with. So go check out the full review from Ryan on MacStories.
Yeah, that's a really good-looking app. I haven't used it in a while myself, and I'm thinking about doing it for the exact same reason in terms of subscriptions, because I feel like I'm juggling so many different subscriptions now, and I'm in and out of different ones all the time, whether it's video services for TV or whether it's apps or whatever it happens to be. And it'd be nice to just kind of put that all in one place and get a sense for what I'm paying month to month, and use it as a reminder to go back and evaluate those things once in a while. All right, Federico, the last review that I want to mention for this episode is one that Ryan also did called Keep. And Keep is a read later app that Ryan just kind of found out of nowhere, just browsing the App Store, right? Because he was unsatisfied with his current read later setup, and so he went looking for a new app and found Keep. And what's interesting about it makes it a little different than some of the things that some listeners might have tried before, is that it has a concept of both tagging and favorites built into it. And the tagging one to me is probably the most interesting, because that allows you to filter your articles in all sorts of different ways and kind of work your way through a long list. If you're one of, I think most people, myself included, sometimes saves things for later. And then before you know it, you've got hundreds of articles. And, if they're just chronological, it feels like it's very hard to get down through the stack of articles and find the one from 3 months ago that you want to get. And with tagging, including, there's a premium feature that uses a Google natural language API to suggest tags. You can very quickly and easily tag things, and it makes it simpler to find them as well. So, it's something I haven't had a chance to try this yet, but it really intrigued me. It also intrigued me that not only does this app use the Google natural language API, but it also uses the Google text-to-speech API, which is another premium feature, which will read your articles back to you. And so here we've got an example of a modern iOS app that is relying primarily for some of its most sophisticated features on Google APIs. And Google is really good at this sort of thing. So I think that that's a good choice and something that I'd like. I mean, I'm curious to try myself and figure out exactly how well it works.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this app, especially because of the combination of like multiple ways to read articles, or in this case, you can listen to an article, which is very interesting to me. And also the fact that it can combine, if you want, both articles and videos, because links that you save from YouTube, they automatically go into a videos tab. And that is very interesting to me. I'm still using Reader, and I'm probably going to be sticking with Reader for the Read Later account that you can have inside Reader, especially because I am working on some new shortcuts for Reader for managing your read later queue, but this one is a really interesting option. It uses a Safari View controller and it supports context menus. It's one of those apps that comes out of nowhere and that quite often you can find on MacStories because the three of us, we do like to just browse the App Store and try stuff, which maybe not a lot of other folks do these days. So Ryan actually surprised me even with this review. I had no idea he was working on this one.
Yeah, no, I didn't either. And that it just goes to show that there are a lot of gems on the App Store that are just waiting to be found. And that's, that's part of our job that I really enjoy is finding these little things like Ryan found this week. All right, Federico, let's transition over to the club this week and talk a little bit about what we did over there. Ryan had a favorite this week, which was Miximum. And Miximum is a pretty interesting app. You've used it before, haven't you?
I think I did, actually, yes.
Yeah, it's a music app.
For smart playlists. Well, not really smart, but an approximation of that.
Yes, it does some things very similar to smart playlists in the music app on the Mac, but I guess the one limitation with Miximum is that they can't automatically update. So if you make a playlist of every song that you've given a heart to, it will freeze that in time as of the day you make the mix. It won't update with any ones you subsequently to that, but it is a pretty nice way to make some fairly sophisticated playlists and have them on your iPhone.
Yeah, and I'm also working on a story about speaking of the perspective icons, I'm working on a story about how I'm actually using perspectives in OmniFocus Pro. And I'm planning this story for the website eventually. I actually want to detail what are the filters and the rules that I use for the perspectives that I have and why am I using them. But for now, I have created a teaser. So I've shared a teaser with some example perspectives in the issue of MacStories Weekly. So I didn't want to wait for next week or maybe in a couple of weeks when I get to share the complete story on the site. But I figured in the meantime, because now that we have these icons and maybe there's the weekend coming up and maybe folks will they want to play around with the icons. They want to play around with perspectives again. It's a good time to share some of the details. So I figured I'm just going to show members a subset of my perspectives, and maybe that gives them some inspiration to play around with OmniFocus and perspectives, and maybe use our custom icons as well.
Yeah, that'll be great. I'm looking forward to seeing that because I've been thinking about doing a little bit more with OmniFocus myself. I had a collection this week that I call Explore the World. And what got me thinking about this was that a couple of things. One is that I'm been stuck at home for weeks now. And two, I had this trip coming up where I had to drive to California and back. And I was thinking about the kinds of apps that can kind of augment both trips and learning things without necessarily leaving home. And I ran across a couple of apps that really got me thinking about this more. One is called Daily Art. And it's just a relatively simple app for just seeing great works of art from museums around the world with some interesting information about each one, which I just enjoy kind of dipping into once in a while. And then another one is called Plant Snap. And the reason I included this one is that what it lets you do is point your phone's camera at a plant out in the world and get some information about it and figure out what it is. And, it's when you're on lockdown like we've been, I've been able to, at least in where I live, go out for walks and hikes and things like that. I can be outdoors. So it's just a way to have a bit of an activity after you've done, a walk around the neighborhood for the 20th time, which gets a little boring. It gives you a little something extra to try and do. And then for the trip, I had a couple of other apps, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but one of them that I thought was really interesting is Explore Here, which is it uses location tracking to give you an idea of historical events that happened around you. So it has databases of things like historical markers. So if you're driving down the highway, you can stop at a rest area and there might be a historical marker there. It'll tell you a little bit about what happened there in U.S. history. I think it's a U.S. only app, but kind of an interesting way to learn a little bit more about the things around you that you're seeing when you're in a place that you're not used to. And then finally this week on the club, we had another episode of MacStories Unplugged, which is our club exclusive podcast where you did a very nerdy deep dive into Margin Note 3, which is a PDF annotation tool, right?
Yeah, it's a PDF annotation tool that has been around for a long time. I actually used it a couple of years ago for one of my iOS reviews. And so I was familiar with Margin Note, but I never really took a good look at Margin Note version 3, which came out last year in 2019, I believe. And it just so happened that I recently discovered that Margin Note supports a bunch of really impressive features for annotating PDFs and linking notes between different PDFs to each other. So we're going to discuss that in MacStories Unplugged. And we also talk about how I also discovered that Margin Note supports JavaScript automation and how in an upcoming version of the app, you will be able to install plugins made by other Margin Note users. And you can sort of take a look at some examples right now. But yeah, we're going to talk about that in Weekly and in Unplugged, which you will find, of course, linked in the newsletter with a link to subscribe via RSS. And yeah, it's a very geeky and conversation about research. And in this case, it's a very specific application that I knew before, but I had no idea it actually went this deep into PDF annotations and automation at the same time.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to talk to you about because, like you, I was aware of the app and had used it in the past, but it's been a while, and they've really been developing it and coming up with a lot of new interesting features. All right, Federico, before we get to our Unwind picks, I want to thank our sponsor, and that is Agenda. Agenda is the sponsor for both MacStories and Unwind this week. And, you know, you've probably heard of Agenda if you're listening to this show. It's the app for date-focused note-taking. Agenda is an award-winning note-taking app that works on iOS, iPadOS, and the Mac, and it has a focus on dates. The app won an Apple Design Award, and of course, it also won a MacStories Selects Award for the best new app in 2018. It provides a unique perspective and context on note-taking by combining it with your calendar. That's what really makes this different from other apps. By tightly integrating those two things, the app really becomes more than either of those two things could be by themselves. You can do all sorts of things. You can keep a journal. One thing I know a lot of our readers have used it for in the past is a way to prepare notes for meetings so that your notes are always close at hand when you run off to a meeting. But you can also use it to do things like track big projects and a whole lot more. And then this week, version 10 came out, and that includes note templates and also a new share extension that lets you add things like images, links, and files, as well as text from another app into Agenda. Plus, the app now supports new languages, including French, Spanish, German, and Chinese. Don't forget, too, that, of course, you can always create calendar events from right within inside Agenda because the app works with both Apple calendars and reminders. Agenda is a free-to-use app, but it has premium features that are available via an in-app purchase, and it has a very interesting model here where when you buy that in-app purchase, you get all the premium features that are available as of that date, plus the premium features that come out for the next 12 months. Thanks to Agenda for supporting MacStories this week. All right, Federico, let's dive into our Unwind picks. Why don't you get us started today?
All right. Yes. So I have a music pick. This is an album that I have been anticipating for a long time and that I have been listening to obsessively over the past week since it came out last Friday. It is the new album by the 1975 called Notes on a Conditional Form. So this album is a messy one. It's
It's eclectic.
It is eclectic, and I feel like there's an interesting parallel between this album and the current state of the world, right? It's messy and it's diverse and it's a little bit over the place, but it's got a soul, I think, to it that holds everything together. So I was reading through some of the reviews. Some websites really didn't like it, but Pitchfork, which is, the reputable music website that they do long form reviews. I love Pitchfork. They had a good description for it, which is a long, messy experiment that just so happens to peak with some of their sharpest songs ever. And that line really resonated with me because that's exactly how I feel about this. So this album has a very complicated history. It was supposed to come out last year, and it was delayed multiple times. It was recorded between tours around the world in 16 different studios.
Oh,
You
wow.
can imagine, 16 different studios is a lot of different places to record the same album. There's some guest appearances by the folks of the likes of FKA Twigs and Phoebe Bridgers. It starts with a speech by Greta Thunberg, so which is pretty awesome, but very surprising if you just start the album.
Sure.
You can actually make an entire EP just out of the symphonic and instrumental pieces in this album. It takes more than an hour of your time to go through the entire track list. I believe it's 22 songs, but I just love it. And the thing about this album is that despite the mix of styles, so you have your traditional 1975, 80s inspired pop rock, and you have
Right.
your Britpop, you have shoegaze, you have electronic pieces, you have symphonic instrumental pieces, you have some songs where Matt Healy is almost rapping instead of singing. It's a very weird, in a good way for me, mix of different genres and styles. But the thing about it is that when the 1975 attempt these different styles, they always sound credible to me. Like, it's not like you, John, suddenly started, I don't know, you came to me and you were like, yeah, now I want to be a rapper and I'm going to put tattoos on my face. And I'll be like, John, what are you doing now? You're having like
That's
a
not you.
midlife crisis or something. This is not you. But the 1975, they can do some really weird stuff. And I would be like, yeah, they can do it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds good. So I also recommend reading this interview that they've done with Pitchfork, with Matt Healy, who's the lead singer on the 1975, and I found in there another line. So I guess this is a music recommendation, but also two articles that I highly suggest reading. There's this line that stood out to me. Matt Healy said, "Since we started making our first album, I've resented spending time with stuff that didn't make me jealous or wasn't informative in some way." And that is absolutely something that I also feel in the creative process. I feel like being jealous in a good way of other artists, of other creators, is a great motivation to push me do more and push me to do different things or do them better. So like the idea of being jealous of other, spending time with things that make you jealous that you didn't actually make them yourself, that is a great feeling to have if you're working any creative field. So I love the way that the 1975 think. I love the way that the 1975 sound. And this album, it's not for everybody, but if you're the kind of person who, well, one, you need to like the 1975. But even if you don't, I suggest giving it a listen. And, in Apple Music, you can pick the songs that have the little star next to them. Those are the most popular ones. And I would be really surprised if you've ever liked one of my music recommendations. I think you're going to find something that you like in this album.
Yeah, I really like this album a lot too, and and the reviews really were all over the place. And I think it's one of those albums that just comes out of the gate by surprising and shocking you by being kind of daring, because it opens with that speech by Greta Thunberg and then goes into a very hard rocking song
Yes.
that is very not like the 1975 at all,
No.
right? And then, you kind of settled in with some of the more instrumental type songs and more traditional 1975 songs. So there are things here that people, I think, can relate to if they're a fan of the older records, but there's also a lot here to kind of challenge the listener, which I think is kind of great. And I agree with you. I've saved those articles myself for reading over the weekend. I want to really dig into those because I think those are some really interesting perspectives on the creative process. And it is messy. It is all over the place. And it is all in kind of a great way that way. And I think some of the reviewers missed that. I do think it does hang together at the end of the day. I'm not sure if there are, I'm sure there are going to be times when I listen to this album when I skip around, because there are songs that I want to hear over and over again. But it's also an album that I think you should try it from beginning to end, because I think that you get a better sense for what this is all about if you listen to it that way. All right, Federico, I have two picks for today that are both game related. And the first
Okay.
one is a game that I played on Xbox. It's called Moving Out, and it's a lot like Overcooked, if anyone's played Overcooked before. It's a co-op game where you have to race around a house and other buildings and move furniture onto a truck. There is a puzzle aspect to this game where you have to kind of maneuver different pieces of furniture out of the house, whether it's tossing it out a window or fitting it through a doorway, or getting certain pieces out before the others so they all fit, and also fitting everything on your truck in a way that doesn't fall off the side. And it's all time sensitive, so there's a countdown timer going, and your score kind of depends on how quickly you do this all. And it's also just got these really, I guess, sloppy mechanics that are on purpose, where it makes it a little harder because it's got a feel of like a slapstick cartoon that you're playing at the same time. And I just kind of love it. I like the fact that it's a co-op game because, I had my kids home with me for a long time during this lockdown, and we're running out of TV shows to watch and running out of things to do. And having a co-op game where everybody can kind of get involved is a lot of fun to do. And it's simple to learn, but hard to master. So it's definitely a fun game to play. I'll include a link to the Polygon review of
Nice.
it in the show notes. But I've had fun with that one. And then I discovered through Daring Fireball, of all places, a series of YouTube videos that I wanted to recommend. And they're game makers. It's called Game Maker's Toolkit Design Icons, and these are video game videos on YouTube about classic games. And there are only a couple in this series so far. They started last fall, but there is a video about Space Invaders and another one about Pac-Man. And if you like anything about video game history and design and choices that are made in games and things that you can see echoed in modern games from games that were built in the 80s, for instance, or 70s even, it's really fascinating. They're really short. They're like 10 to 15 minutes long, but there's a lot of information packed into each one of them. And I found it really fascinating, especially, learning things about how the way Space Invaders speeds up as you're playing it is because of the way the chips work and the ability, how fast the chips could write the sprites to the screen. And that originally that was considered a bug, but then they decided to stay with it because it added another dynamic to the game. It's just that sort of fascinating, working within the constraints of the hardware and software that was available at the time, that made what was one of the most popular video games of all time. So definitely worth watching, especially if you're kind of a video game history nerd like I am, and I know Federico is. So
Yeah.
definitely one to watch.
Very nice.
All right, Federico, that's it for this week. I want to thank our sponsor again for MacStories and Unwind this week, and that is Agenda. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is at Vitici on Instagram and Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.